Yeah, cool. So tonight we're carrying on our series on the on Jesus's "I am" statements and looking at the "I am the light of the world." So we're gonna start ourselves off by sort of looking at the verse where he says this. So this is taken from John chapter 8, and it says, "When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, 'I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.'" And I think hopefully it's obvious that if we've been in Christian circles for a while, that there's some amount of sort of biblical symbolism going on here. This idea of Jesus of being light, and if we went around the room and sort of asked, what does this sort of picture symbolize? We'd probably get a variety of answers. That light helps us to see, and so it sort of represents truth. It acts as guidance. Jesus asks us to follow him so that we can experience his light, and it sort of exposes lies and sins. And so by walking in Jesus's light, we're going to gain life ourselves. And in some sense, that's the sermon over. That's all true and perfect, and that's good. But I think what I want to try and convey tonight is that actually often biblical symbolism goes quite a lot deeper than perhaps we think about. And I think part of this is to think that like God's analogy is very different from human analogy, right? Like if we reach to some physical thing to explain some abstract concept, we have to sort of go out and look for something and think, oh, what's going to work to explain this? And there's never a perfect correspondence. Whereas with God, of course, He created the world, right? And I think it's the case that when God uses things like light to explain His nature, He's sort of like baked himself and his nature into creation. He's put something of his own nature into creation, and so the analogy often goes a lot deeper when it comes to God describing himself, or Jesus describing himself using something from the physical world. Um, and like the Bible tells us this, right? Like there's lots of passages that we could look at, but in Psalms we read that the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they display knowledge. So there's this idea that the sky and the stars and the heavens are somehow showing God's glory, right? They're showing something of God's nature. Um, and likewise, in Romans, we read this passage: "What may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that humans are without excuse." And often this is a passage which is used as a sort of way of saying that, look, even if there's some remote tribe that have never heard the gospel, they too can know God's nature, right? And I think that sometimes people take that the wrong way. Perhaps I think I don't think it's the case that you can look at creation and the name Jesus will come to you necessarily, but I do think we can learn something about the characteristics of God and how God works and relates to the world through His creation and through the fact that He's sort of put Himself and His nature in creation. Um, and I do think there's perhaps something of a warning in this. Often when Ari teaches us, he tells us that we've got to go back to what the Bible says. We don't want to add loads of our own interpretation on top of that. And there's loads of passages that speak of that. And in Corinthians, we're told to not deceive ourselves. That wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. In 1 John, we read that we should not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're from God. But I think a good rule of thumb is that if the Bible makes a connection between something of God's nature and something in creation, then that's like an invitation to us that we can ponder upon it. And I really think that the Bible is designed as this like meditative literature, right? That you don't just read it and then you're done. No, you can read it over a lifetime and ponder upon it. And so I think when Jesus says that He's the light of the world, that's an invitation that we can start to ponder more deeply about what is the sort of symbolism behind that. But then it is really important to then, if we have some insight, that we bring it back to the Bible and test it against the Word and say, oh yeah, is there biblical evidence for what we've sort of found here? Okay, so I guess with that preamble out of the way, it would be good to look at the context of the passage in which Jesus says that He's the light of the world. And so, yeah, it's from John 3, and it's the story of the adulterous woman. So I'll read this together. So the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery and said to Jesus, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say? Jesus bent down and started to write in the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left. Jesus straightened up and asked her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Go now and leave your life of sin. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so I think yeah, obviously immediately from this passage we see this connection between this saying of Jesus that he's the light of the world and this idea of justice, right? And I think justice really is about seeing, right? It's about things that are hidden, things, lies being brought into light and being brought into yeah, something that we can see, and truth being revealed. And so we're seeing this connection between light and the representation of truth and the sort of revealing of lies. And there's, if you go and read about what they mean when Jesus, like what's Jesus writing in the ground, there's lots of different theories if you go and read about it. And the Bible never explicitly says, so we can't sort of take this too literally. But one idea is that maybe he's writing a list of sins, right, of the Pharisees in the ground, and as they read it, their own guilt is brought to mind, and so they can no longer, in good conscience, condemn this woman. And so I think that there is this idea of yeah, like bringing something that's hidden into the light. And I think it's interesting to sort of ponder on like what's the relationship between light and darkness, right? And like if you turn a light on in a room, it's like inevitable the darkness is going to go away. It's not like a maybe, right? It's inevitable. And in the same way, I think when truths are told, like inevitably, like lies are revealed and incorrect things and lies are shown for what they are. And I think perhaps there's also inevitability about how that would lead to judgment. Like if I tell you some facts about a person that you've not met before, you're immediately going to start judging them and be like, oh, is this someone I'm going to like? Is this someone I'm going to get on with, etc. Even maybe without the full truth. And so maybe that leads to a question of, does this actually lead to justice? And I think this is a sort of another part of like what does light reveal? If we only like illuminate something, so this is a picture of a Rubik's cube. If we only illuminate it with red light, so rather than the full spectrum of colors, it's just red light. Like we can't like discern about it properly, right? Like if I ask you which of these are the blue ones and which are the green ones, like you can't tell. It's some of the dark squares, but you don't know which is which because neither of them are reflecting the red light. And it's only when we have the full illumination, the full truth, that we can actually judge correctly, that we can actually discern correctly. And so I think there's this sort of idea that that light will sort of inevitably lead to judgment in some sense, having truth, but actually we've got to be careful that we've got the full picture before we judge too harshly, perhaps. The next sort of picture that I want to explore is this is a relationship between light and fire. And I think perhaps for us in the modern world, it's not a connection that we make quite so intrinsically, but for the sort of ancient Israelites, the only way they were going to be able to make light artificially was using fire, right? Like it's really quite a modern invention that we've separated light and fire. Even light bulbs produce heat until you get to like modern LED solutions. And so there's this real intrinsic link between light and truth and fire. And in the Bible, we see that fire itself is a representation of transformation. And so there's this idea of like purifying metal, right? So like in Proverbs, we read that the crucible is for silver and the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests hearts. And then at the bottom in 1 Peter, we read that in all of it, in all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. And so yeah, we've got this picture of a refining fire, right? And if you've never seen like gold being refined, you get this like layer of like slag and impurities rising to the top to this dark stuff. And then you get the pure gold sort of underneath it. And so there's this idea of like through fire, like the impurities like rise to the top and burn off or can be scraped off. And what's pure is what remains. Um, and yeah, we've got this like saying that we say, oh, the truth hurts, and it's like, yeah, if you stick your hand in fire, it's going to hurt. But actually, through that there's a method of transformation, and it's likewise that the truth is what brings transformation in our lives. Um, there's also this connection in nature between like fire and new growth. It's like if you have a forest fire, that actually releases a load of nutrients into the soil, and also it means that like sunlight can get down to the soil where previously it was blocked by trees and foliage. And so from that you get a load of new growth, and it's actually sometimes healthy for a forest to experience fire. And so there's this idea of like old things dying and making way for new growth. And we see that image in the Bible so much as well with baptism, and going into the water, dying to your old self, and there being new life. Um, so yeah, we've got this real connection between truth and transformation. And I think if we look at like the relationship between them, it's quite different to the relationship between truth and like justice, right? So like we've said that truth is like almost inevitably causes justice, but with light and fire and with truth and transformation, it's almost this two-way relationship. So we know that fire creates light, and likewise if we're transformed, I think we see more truth, right? Like we're able to understand more truth. But there's also this reverse, that in some sense light can create fire. If you've got a magnifying glass and concentrate it onto a leaf, you can actually make it combust, right? And it's because there's infrared radiation as well, which is really just another wavelength of light. And so there's this intrinsic link. And likewise truth is going to like create transformation in our lives. um, but it can only do so when there's fuel. Like you can't start a fire with any amount of light unless there's fuel. And I think in our lives, if we want transformation, we have to have a willingness, right? We can't have stubborn hearts. We have to be willing to allow God's truth to enter into our lives and to start this transformation process. Yeah, and so I think the sort of final connection I wanna bring up is this idea of starlight. And often in the Bible, starlight is associated with this sort of like wisdom or guidance. And we see this picture perhaps most clearly with the wise men, right? When they want to find Jesus, like they're following the star to Bethlehem. And in Psalm 19, we read this passage earlier that it says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands. So it's this idea that by looking to the stars, we're pointed to the glory of God. And so there's this idea of like stars point to something else, right? Like point to something greater than them. So either it's pointing the wise men to where Jesus is, or it's pointing us to the glory of God. And we see this outside of the Bible as well. There's the idea of like sailors navigating by starlight, and this goes back to ancient times. There's, in physics, in astronomy, so much of what we know about the universe is because stars are like giving us pointers to other things. We can detect planets based on how stars are moving, but we can't see the planets themselves. They're pointing to a truth. And there's even this idea of like astrology, right? And hopefully as Christians, we don't believe in this sort of like mysticism and this idea that we can sort of divine things from, when you were born, the constellations were here. But actually, I think perhaps this is evidence still that perhaps the devil has twisted this idea, right? That starlight is this symbol of wisdom and this guidance and of pointing us to something else. And so the devil has twisted that slightly and said, oh yeah, you can like divine someone's personality by looking at the stars or whatever. And so often I think when we see something that's from the devil, it's because actually there was a truth originally underlying it, and it's just been twisted in some way. Um, but the really cool thing about stars is that we're called to shine too, right? Like we're called to be stars. And again, there's multiple places in the Bible that talk about this. But in Philippians, in Philippians 2:14, we read this: do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault, in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life. So this is again showing us that, like, we're meant to be pointing to God, right? We're meant to be shining in and amongst our generation, and we can only do that by holding onto the truth, onto the word, right? There's this connection between word and truth. But so by holding on to the truth, by holding on to God's light, we too can shine and be a light to those around us. And in Daniel, we see this same connection, this idea of the wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens. People that lead many to righteousness will be like the stars forever and ever. So again, it's this idea of leading, of pointing, of people to something else, to something greater than ourselves. And I think, like, Jesus like backs this up, right? This idea that we're meant to shine, because I think of all the I am statements that Jesus makes, this is the only one that he also declares about us, right? So if we look at these, the bread of life, the gate, the resurrection, the way, the truth, life, the true vine, none of these Jesus says we are, right? We're not bread. We can't be eaten for nourishment. We're not a gate and a way into resurrection. And we're the true vine. We're told that we're the branches. We're not the vine. And so all of these, it's like not our job, right? The good shepherds, you could maybe make a case that there's a bit more of this for us. Like Jesus tells Peter to feed his sheep. There's this idea of like a church pastor is like shepherding a flock. But still, we're not called like the good shepherd, right? When Ari spoke last week, he was talking about how it's like the definite article. It's like the good shepherd. And so while maybe we have some part to play and some role in this, like, we're not the good shepherd. But this idea of being the light of the world is like explicitly yes, right? Like Jesus is like, this is for us too. And we read this in Matthew 14. In Matthew 5, verse 14. We read that you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but put it on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So there's this idea that, just as stars are like scattered in the night sky and they're meant to point to God's glory, so we as Christians are scattered in amongst the in the world, and we're meant to shine and point people to God, right? And so it's this image of how we can do that. And sometimes I think it's a little bit abstract, right? It's like, how do we do that? How do we point people to God? But actually, like, all these things that are connected to light are really attractive, right? And so when we're trying to think of like, how can I point to God, I think we should be thinking of these things, because like, stars are attractive, right? People are going to stargaze and look at the sky because they're awestruck by the beauty. I used to go to scouts, and whenever there was a fire lit, everyone came running, right? Everyone loves fire. Everyone wants to be in the warmth and is just memorized by it and to see it. And likewise, people like the daylight, right? They like darkness to be gone. So all of these things are attractive to people. And in the same way, I think all of these ideas of like removing lies and justice and the guidance and of transformation, all of these are attractive. People actually like the truth. They're curious about the truth and they want to find out what it is. And so that if we're offering a truth to people that is people can genuinely believe, and that's going to be attractive to people. If we're able to offer wise guidance, people are going to be like, oh, what, how come this person knows the best way to live? And it's like, well, hey, because we're just taking information from the Bible, right? And that and we can guide others through sort of biblical wisdom. And I think people are attracted to transformation as well, right? Of like, there's all this idea of like self-improvement in the world, but I think people really are attracted to people that are getting better and are striving towards something. And hopefully for us, we're striving to become more Christ-like. We're striving to live in the way that God designed for us. So we're gonna sort of move into a time of discussion, and I think it would be great perhaps just to talk about does any of these like connections between light and different things, they stand out to you, or any of them new to you? So there was the idea of like truth, justice, transformation, guidance, wisdom, or maybe there's something else that you've thought about previously. Maybe there's this idea of like plants take in light as like nutrients, right? And we take in the truth as nutrients. There's this idea of like daylight and safety versus like the night and crime. So there's loads of connections, and lots of these come up in the Bible. I think it'd be great just to talk to one another and share what stands out you know, what the sort of symbolism, and then also to think about, yeah, what do we need from Jesus as light, and how can we be light to the world around us?